Welcome everyone. I'm Justin David, class of 1986, and here with Judith Insell, who graduated in 1987. And Judith is a violist. You received your bachelor's and your master's at the Easton School of Music and has gone on to have a tremendously robust career as a violist across genres. You were telling me the other night that you also have your own viola group or duet where you do improvisation and play in all genres. And now in particular, you've branched out to become an administrator and an educator, and you're in the process right now of writing a curriculum that will reach thousands of children in New York, and mostly children of color, or many children of color. And why don't we start there, and then we'll branch out and talk about your path and whatever you want.
So yeah, at the moment I'm working as the curriculum and artist development director for the Bronx Arts Ensemble. The job entails is what you said, basically writing arts education curriculum, and this is not just music, it's across music, dance, visual arts, and theater, to actually look at a few viewpoints through art forms. So we're teaching the students in grade levels from K through 12 out in New York City public schools. But we're not just teaching them like the basic skill sets of how to play or sing or draw or dance or act. We are also actually incorporating into our curriculum a lot about culturally responsive aspects to the cultures that are in the classrooms where we teach. We do a lot of work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also are doing a lot of work with social emotional learning, and we will be doing a lot more of that considering the situation that we're in right now. We want to help the students to be in our classes, feel open to express themselves fully emotionally, and also to have a real understanding of their culture and cultures from around the world.
Well, so I have so many questions about this. For one, what does it mean to build in cultural responsiveness into a curriculum and to build in cultural competency into a curriculum? And when you think of New York City, I mean, you're talking, dozens of cultures potentially in a single school. So how do you kind of address this kind of brimming diversity?
So basically what I'm charged with doing is helping our teaching artists that go into our school settings, either in the in-school day or after school programs, and really just being sensitive to who's in your classroom. So you as a teacher can come to know and get the relationship going with your students and find out a lot about what their background is. And for the students that are working with the Bronx Arts Ensemble, those are students in the Bronx, and we know the demographics of the Bronx pretty well, that those are basically Black and brown kids, and from the backgrounds of like the Dominican Republic or the Caribbean, or some directly from Africa. So we try our best to actually incorporate different aspects of their cultures into what we're teaching.
Yeah.
So for example, we have a really robust African drumming and dance curriculum, and we have curriculums that are not your usual offerings in school settings when you have outside vendors come into public school. So African drumming and dancing, we have capoeira, which is martial arts mixed with Brazilian and Afro dance styles. We have a lot of hip hop and contemporary dance classes that we present to the students. As far as the music goes, we try to be as incorporating those things as well into our music classes. So if you're in a general music class for Bronx Arts Ensemble, you're not necessarily going to be learning nursery rhymes. You might be learning in elementary school setting some African folk songs, some songs from South America. So it's kind of almost like we're putting together this quilt of all these really rich cultures of the students that are inside of our classrooms, being really sensitive to who they are and that we're serving them, and their backgrounds are just as important as any other backgrounds. There's been always this kind of like tradition of teaching Western European classical as the classic traditional way to teach of the materials. What we're saying to them is that there are other really great materials and art forms out there in this world, and a lot of them come from the backgrounds that you and your families and your communities come from. So we want to honor that and incorporate that into what we're teaching.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. The way you described it at the end, it almost sounds as if you have students coming into school to learn about their own culture, which they may or may not be exposed to the same degree at home. Am I hearing that right?
Yes, I mean, we are taking this opportunity for students of color to actually make the effort to expose the students to more things that might not be so obvious to them in their everyday life. I mean, to be honest, in this country, this is a very centered white European American cultured country as far as the curriculums that are taught. You don't see a whole lot of Black and brown faces in the literature that the students are given. You don't see or hear that voice in a lot of the curriculum that's presented to them. So we're making this conscious effort to actually help them to understand that their cultures are important, are relevant, are beautiful, and that they should be celebrated. And so even if they're getting a lot of information from home, we just want to reinforce that to help them to know you might not see it in your math class or even in your English class, but we know that this is important art form and we want you to feel comfortable and express yourself through it.
Mm. Mm. Sounds beautiful. Sounds very affirming and powerful, and I would imagine to young people and to teachers, it's really instructive to be in that matrix together.
It is.
Yeah, and how many kids do you reach, either through the curriculum or through Bronx Arts Ensemble?
Well, in a normal year,
Yeah.
I would say about 5,000 kids.
Wow.
So that, is a significant number of kids, and considering that a kid is tied to siblings, is tied to a mom, a dad, aunts, uncles, families, we're trying to actually serve more than the student. We try to work with the students and incorporate the whole community of the school into what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I think our work is much farther reaching than those 5,000 students.
Right. I mean, you're reaching at least 10, 15, 20,000 people through the 5,000
right.
students, it sounds like.
Right.
Oh, it's powerful. That's right. Let's talk about influence. Can you, I'm thinking about how I know you, of course, which is from LaGuardia, and knowing you as a classical violist. How did you go from the musical tradition that you trained in to where you are now? And I'd love to hear more about how you grew up, where you grew up. You told me you went to Juilliard pre-college. How do all these influences and ideas and desires sort of fit together for you?
Well, I think it's kind of an interesting journey through all that. As I think me as a person, I just like to be diversified in all kinds of things.
Yeah,
So all kinds of music interests me.
yeah.
So I still
What,
love playing in an orchestra,
yeah, yeah.
and I love to play chamber music, but I also love to be playing jazz or improvising or playing in a Broadway show pit. I mean, it's all interesting to me.
Yeah.
So
Well, what did you grow up with at home?
at home,
Yeah.
kind of a mixture of everything.
Yeah.
So my dad in particular listened to a lot of jazz.
Mhm.
My mom would listen to like gospel music quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, my dad liked to listen to orchestra stuff as well. And it was just kind of like, and there was pop music, obviously, that's everywhere. Um, and it's basically was kind of a hodgepodge of all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And whatever interested me, that's what I would listen to.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you it sounds like me as a kid, frankly, whatever,
Right.
whether it was the Archie's Sugar Sugar, which I listened to 5,000 times, or Bach or Mozart, or the Woodstock album, which I wore through, whatever it was. But how did you get started on viola? Did you start on violin first as a kid?
No, I've been a violist all the way through. So
Wow.
I was assigned the viola.
Wow.
I went to at that time, which was called IS 181. I know there were quite a few of us that ended up at Music and Art and Performing Arts because of that program.
Yeah.
And basically, it was assigned to me to play the instrument, and it was just an instant connection. I really loved playing it,
Wow.
and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow.
So in that respect, I understand, like on a personal level, the power of the exposure to the arts
Yeah.
is really important. If we don't make sure that we make that connection with the students to the art forms,
Yeah.
and we just kind of assume that they're going to do it or find it on their own way,
Yeah.
we really can't make that assumption, because the exposure point could really change somebody's life.
Yeah. 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 So I'm gathering that you didn't start playing viola until you got to middle school.
That's right. So I started pretty late.
That's extremely late. My older son, who is about to start a master's in classical piano performance, is mad at me that I didn't start him on piano at 3 and 4. Right? We waited until he was about 7. Right? But not only did you start when you were in middle school, but tell me more about the program in your middle school that gave you the access to it.
Well, it was definitely a unique place.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the kind of place that literally I remember really vividly, that we had this choice of music. We had orchestra, band, and chorus,
Mm-hmm.
and all three of those directors were all three of the heads of the Bronx Borough-wides. So
Wow.
Bronx Borough-wide orchestra,
Wow.
band, and chorus directors all taught in the same school.
Wow. Was that by design, or was it just happenstance?
I don't know. I mean, I was in the 5th grade. What would I know anything about that? So I just show up to go to school. And then you had shop. So I remember it was like, in that environment, the school culture was, if you picked shop, you were just a total loser. And everybody wanted to be in orchestra, band, or chorus.
That's hysterical. That's hysterical.
So probably the complete opposite of everywhere else.
Oh my gosh.
So everybody would be like scrambling. I literally remember this very day where we were supposed to get assigned the instruments, or to chorus.
Mhm.
And you had to like get to the rooms where those things happen. So I was on the way to the orchestra room, and
Mhm.
I was like running and running and running, and I thought, okay, I had thought maybe I should play flute.
Huh.
I think I'll play violin. So I'm like running and running, and my homeroom class was like on the other side of the floor from the orchestra room.
Yeah.
So I get there, and I'm super totally upset because there's all these people on the violin line.
Huh.
So it's like, okay, so I get on the line, and it turns out there's like 3 rows of line for violin.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, everybody wanted to play the violin.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because my father had told me to play the cello.
Huh.
Because
Huh.
he really loved Pablo Casals. He kept telling
Wow.
me that. I'm like,
Wow.
I don't know who the heck that is. And and he says, but the school is named that. So it is the name of the school
really?
is Pablo Casals.
Wow.
I'm not sure if they still have that name, but they did at that point
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
And then basically, the head of the orchestra class came down the 3 rows. So he says,
Yeah.
and he just goes, violin, violin, viola. And I'm on the viola line. I'm like, and that was my really close friend, was just a couple of people down from me. And I literally turned to her and was like, what's a viola? And she's like, I don't know, but we're going to find out. And that's how it happened.
So for someone who's listening to this, who maybe isn't so familiar with the fine distinctions, how would you describe the sound of a viola? Because it's a distinct sound from the it's not just like a lower violin or a higher cello. It's a distinct sound. How would you describe it?
Oh, let's
That's kind
see.
of a
How
tough
would I
task, by the way.
describe it?
What's that?
Huh?
I'm
I'm
just
just,
acknowledging that's a tough task to describe a sound, but you know,
it
how does it resonate
is.
with you?
I think the sound of the viola is kind of, at least on the lower strings, is just incredibly mellow and rich.
Mm.
The only other sound that I really think that sound is anywhere near to is the cello sound.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just this warmth and richness of the tone on the lower end of the instrument. I think that's where the definition comes from, because in the upper parts of the instrument, you can, if you're skilled enough, you can sound like a violin sound, and no one would really be able to tell the difference. But there's just something about that rich, warm tone of the lower register of viola, which is really amazing and like lush and like a warm hug or something. It's just really incredible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, there are these moments when you're listening to an orchestra piece and there's like a viola section. The viola section carries something, and it just works its way inside you, right? And because it's
Right.
totally unexpected, and it has has that unique warmth to it. That's beautiful. Love to hear you play live someday when all this is over. I'd love to come hear you.
Oh, sure, that would be great.
But so here you are in this amazing sounding program, and eventually you find yourself at Juilliard Pre-College, right? Which is
Right.
not only I mean, I don't know what it was like then, but now it's extremely competitive to audition for it. How did that happen? What was your trajectory to starting in 5th grade and then winding up at Juilliard Pre-College?
Well, it was pretty interesting, actually. When I started in 5th grade, obviously I was just like, oh, I really like this.
Yeah.
But, I thought as the years went on, the 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and then you have to kind of like decide to get your act together on what you're going to do and where you're going to go to high school and all that. And I thought, I really want to try to make a go of this at being a violist.
Huh.
So luckily, my mom had a colleague, and my mom was a public school teacher in the New York City public school system.
Oh.
And she had a colleague whose son was in Juilliard College.
Mhm.
And so I guess she told her colleague that I was playing the viola.
Mhm.
And she basically said, hey, well, you should get her into the pre-college if she's really serious about it. And here's what you should do. And she somehow hooked up my mom with Eugene Becker, which was like, at this point, I mean, to this day, it blows my mind. How did that all come about? I don't know.
Who's Eugene Becker for the
So
uninitiated?
Eugene Becker at the time was a career violist in the New York Philharmonic. So
Yeah.
I don't know how all that happened, because here I was, a middle school student.
Mhm.
I didn't really know how this all came about, but by the end of the 8th grade, going into 9th grade, somehow my mom managed to get me to be studying with Eugene Becker. So
Did you audition for him? Did you go in and play and sort of try it out, or how did that? Do you have any memory of that?
no, I just think
Wow.
that it was agreed that I would, you know, my parents would pay for me to have lessons with him. So I went and I had a lesson, and I recall him saying, "Oh, I'm gonna be going in the summer to this place called Esterwood."
Mm.
And so this was like the summer between 9th and 10th grade. And he said, you know, you should come to Esterwood, and then we can really start working.
Wow.
But I'm kind of jumping over things, because also at the same time, I have to give like the total props to Anne Rogan, who also Morgan Peters studied with
Really?
at the Third Street Music School. And
Wow.
Anne is in the section for Orchestra of St. Luke's.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow.
so, and how I ended up with Anne as my teacher was that Paula Washington at school said, you need to get a private teacher. Because when I was in my schooling in middle school, I didn't have a private teacher. So she said to me, you got to, if you want to make great strides in this, you got to get a private teacher. And I said, I don't know where to go for that, and who, what. And so she said, go to Third Street Music School and study with Anne Rogan.
Wow.
So I
Sorry,
started studying.
back up for a second. So you mentioned Paula Washington, or Dr. Paula Washington, who I said to
Yes.
Morgan, she's the greatest teacher I never had. I never had her as a teacher, but I really admired her from afar. Very, very special human being.
Very, very powerful teacher.
Yeah.
So if she told you to do something, you did it.
You did it.
Like,
Now,
okay.
but I'm trying to put together the timeline. Did you know her before you started at Music and Art or LaGuardia? Or whatever?
No.
No. So
When I started at LaGuardia at Music and Art, it was still at the old building.
yeah.
She said I was put into orchestra 6 or 5 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something that I protested when I got there. I said, this is the wrong orchestra for me.
Yeah.
And all she could say was, if you don't have a private teacher, I can't even suggest that you move up to any orchestras higher, like 7 or 8.
Wow.
So I said, okay, so where do I get one? So she told me to go to study with Anne Rogan. So I did.
Wait a second. I need to check in on something here. So you got into Music and Art, which for young people and their parents is a very coveted admission. You got in on viola without having had a private teacher.
That is correct.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So you were not yet studying with Eugene Becker at this point?
No. And in fact, wow. in the world of the here and now, it was pretty remarkable, I think, because I didn't go in and play like I still remember this. I didn't go in there and play like a viola sonata or Bach cello suite or whatever. I went in there and I played the viola part from some orchestra music from Burrowide. That's all I knew.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's what I played.
Wow.
And I did all the like listening part and the singing back and the rhythm test and the whole thing. So I guess they thought I was worthy to be there. So.
What I remember at the time was one of the senior faculty members telling us after we got in that there were two types of students. And I'm not saying which type you were, but they said there were two types of students they admitted. One type who had studied for a long time and through that had gotten to a certain level of proficiency, and others who hadn't yet gotten to that certain level of proficiency, yet they could see through these various metrics that there was potential. Now, I would counter and say, well, how do you know, and are there other biases at work that weed people out who really should be there, but it worked out, whichever one of those students you were, clearly,
Well, I mean, let's be honest, I was the latter. I'm telling you, I had very little training at that point outside of sitting in my middle school orchestra and going to Bronx Burrowide. So that was great. So at least I had Bronx Burrowide.
So you went to the 3rd Street Music School, and I'll tell you, that brings up so many memories, because when I was at PA, I started in 10th grade at PA in 1983. And I became friends with all these young people, some of whom now have chairs in major orchestras. And it was a multi-ethnic group of kids. There were white kids, there were Black kids, there were Asian kids. And I have this memory where we all met one day at the 3rd Street Music School and read through chamber music, which, I was definitely the lowest person on the ladder. But it seemed to be their second home. It's like where they spent their weekends, where they had their lessons. I even went to concerts there a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you to go to 3rd Street? Well, first of all, what was 3rd Street, and what role did it play in your life? And kind of.
Well, 3rd Street, and this is why I've always had this great reverence for community music schools.
Yeah.
3rd Street was the kind of place, and still is, that provides music support, music studies and support for anybody who's interested in studying music. So you don't have to be at a certain level, or, you don't have to have tremendous amounts of money. The tuition is reasonably priced for community members. Mm-hmm. And you just show up, you say, I want to learn this, and you pay something and you get a teacher. And most of the community music school teachers are really serious professional players and have a lot of teaching experience. So it's a really great place that you can really get a lot of great studies from when you're not necessarily on this higher level, like going to a pre-college program. Mm-hmm. And that's actually why I have to give a lot of credit to Ann Rogan, because when I got to her and I told her this whole thing about, my mom is hooking me up with Eugene Becker, and I had this whole meeting of the minds of my mom, Eugene Becker, me, and this whole discussion about, if you want to be a professional violist, here's what you got to do. Mm-hmm. I go back to Ann Rogan and say, well, I've been told that if I work with you for 2 years, so at 2 school years and 2 summers with Mr. Becker, it's very likely that I can get myself into Juilliard pre-college for my junior year. So she could have just looked at me like, what? I don't want to do that. I'm going to get rid, you're going to just like do this and then disappear after 2 years.
Right.
But no, it was the complete opposite. She's like, okay, here's what we got to work on. So
Wow.
this is one of the things that I really love about the community music school. The concept is you are there to serve whoever comes through the door for whatever they are there to do.
Yeah.
And also it's a great part of what I call the arts education ecosystem, because most of the time the students are not trying to stay there. They are trying to either have a very recreational experience and revere the art form, but don't have any plans to actually become a musician,
Yeah.
or they are trying to hone their craft and move up in the chain into a higher level to become that professional. So she understood what I was trying to do. She prepared me for 2 years.
Wow.
Between her and Mr. Becker and those 2 summers, I ended up at Juilliard Pre-College studying with Eugene Becker.
What did you have to do? How much work did you have to put into your instrument to make that happen?
What did I have to do? Oh my God.
How many hours a day did you have to practice?
5 maybe.
5 hours a day?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot to catch up on. Like I said before that, I didn't really ever have a private teacher before.
Right.
So there was a lot I didn't know.
Right.
So and Mr. Becker was clear on that, and so was Ann Rogan. So basically they kind of mapped out a plan for me as to what I needed to work on for those 2 years. And then I ended up auditioning for Juilliard Pre-College, got accepted, and was there for my junior and senior year of high school.
Wow. But I'm fascinated by this 5 hours, 5 hours a day of practicing, because it sounds like an extraordinary demand for a young teenager who has classes and social life and normal distractions for a teenager. How did you do 5 hours a day as 14, 15-year-old kid?
Well, it wasn't easy. This is kind of a funny question, because who also asked me that question was my daughter years ago when she was a teenager and when she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I remember her asking me over and over again, so what hobbies did you have, or what did you do for fun? I said,
Right.
I practiced the viola. I didn't have time to do anything else.
Right.
So I vividly remember going to sleep on average around like 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
Because I needed to do, the academic schoolwork.
Yeah.
And I had to put in the hours. I had to practice. I knew I would. I had a long road to go, and I needed to make up a lot of footing from people for me, like you said, who have been playing since they were 3 years old.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to go to Juilliard Pre-College, so I did the work.
Wow. Well, you make it sound so rational.
But it was rational to me, because that's what I wanted to do. So if I decided that was the path I was going to go, I knew that that's what I was going to have to do.
Wow.
So I'm really glad I did it. I mean, talk about like a total like incredible culture shock, because then you asked me what it was like to be at Juilliard Pre-College.
Right.
I was there with Gil Shaham, Midori, who else? I mean, people that are like in all the major orchestras. Right. Danny Matsukawa, who went through as well through LaGuardia, ended up at Curtis, and then off to Nashville Symphony, and then to Philadelphia Orchestra. I mean, these are the people that were there. Ray Riccomini, who's a fantastic guy, who is in the Met Opera Orchestra as one of the trumpet players. Matt Heimovitz was there. I mean,
really?
Yes, everybody
I saw
was there.
him play recently.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
We were all there at the same time. It was unbelievable. It will talk about like pushing yourself to get even to the next highest level. It was like sink or swim. So yes, I had to practice even harder to stay in there.
Right, right. So you practice 5 hours a day. I assume this is what you did in
I think
summer.
I was up to 6 hours at that point to be in pre-college. I would think I was at 6.
Yeah. and then you get in and it doesn't let up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, at that point it was just like there was unbelievable amounts of work
Yeah.
because the music was way harder than anything else I had ever encountered.
Yeah. And by the music, you mean not only your solo repertoire, but chamber repertoire and orchestra repertoire and things like
Right.
that.
Exactly.
What did you think of the environment? How did you find it? Did you feel, I mean, aside from sort of knowing your place in the musician pecking order, which I know is something classical musicians do, it's one of the sides of the classical music world I don't like. But aside from that, I mean, how did you feel being in that environment? What did it, did you feel like you belonged? Did you feel like I've claimed my place, or were there other thoughts going through your head at the same time?
Well, since we're being like completely bare honest, it was a very hard place for me to be.
Yeah.
I was the one Black person in the sea of everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of the first places that I really experienced feeling like I'm an outsider. I don't belong or fit into what's going on here. It was not easy for me to make friends there. I think that the best thing that happened to me was the chamber music, and literally I'm still friends with those people to this day.
Wow. Wow.
So that was kind of like, I first started with a quartet and then we ended up in a quintet, and those 4 other people are pretty tight to me to this day.
Wow.
But it was pretty interesting because I had this kind of like mixed life experience going on at the same time. LaGuardia, there was all these people from all these different backgrounds, from all these different cultures, everything, like totally easygoing, hanging. There's loads of people of color there. And then Saturday and Sunday, there's nobody like that there. Also, there was, frankly, quite a bit of disparity between the economic stature of me and everybody else. I mean, my parents weren't like destitute and poor, but there were a lot of tremendously wealthy people in there, and you could feel that they were kids from wealth, and so there was this whole kind of vibe to it. Like I never felt like I really don't fit in here that well. But the music making kind of made up for it.
Uh-huh.
So it was worth it to me to go through feeling kind of an awkwardness, but at the same time, I was like, I don't really care. I just want to make music. I want to make some really good music. So this is the place to do it.
Wow. Were you conscious of those feelings were you able to name those feelings at the time? Are these insights that came to you later with more perspective and language that you learned later?
Well, at the time, I mean, I could obviously feel, well, maybe it's not so obviously. I felt something. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember having awkward conversations with people that, that there was this kind of separate feeling, or like, oh, so you're from the Bronx? So it's like, there were some people that couldn't accept that the Bronx also included Riverdale, and they lived in Riverdale, so they lived in the Bronx too. It was like this weirdness about it.
Yeah.
It was a very strange feeling, like, wow, nobody like really understands where I'm from.
Yeah.
But I don't really care because I want to make the music.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, that's what it was like going beyond.
Yeah. When you got to
That's what it
MSN?
was like going into conservatory. Exactly.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, I don't like, looking around. There's hardly any people of color here.
Yeah.
Well, if I want to train properly and I want to get to the next level, I'll just do what I have to do in this environment. But there were many times where I felt like, I don't really feel like anybody's really warm and fuzzy about me being here, but I'm here to work. I'm here to hone my craft. I enjoy doing what I'm doing and playing the music, so I can just look beyond that. So I've spent a lot of time in the classical music world feeling like that and trying to just accomplish what I want to accomplish and to play music that I really enjoy. But along the way, there's been a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I mean, just as a friend, I would say that because, to hear you talk about how you got to where you got to, Juilliard pre-college is one thing, but getting to a conservatory, in 4 years after never having having had a private teacher, that's, the musical equivalent of climbing Mount Everest without oxygen. I mean, it's really an extraordinary trajectory. But then to have to battle the institutional racism that's there and personal examples of racism, I can't imagine how you would how any person would push through that, but you did. Were there people you could talk to about what you were experiencing or what you were feeling? Particularly, I would imagine when you got to MSN, you're older, you have more language for this. But was there anyone you could turn to who was a sympathetic ear, who could encourage you?
I don't recall anybody that I really talked to about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just was kind of the way it was.
Yeah.
And me personally, I think that, I can say this with confidence that I guess I'm kind of a resilient person. So, because I have very often will just do whatever I want to do. And I don't really care what other people think about it or how it looks or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
I want to do this. This is something that gives me satisfaction or pleasure. Like, I want to improvise on viola, and I had so many people look at me like, what? And I'm like, well, I don't care what you think. This is something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
So, I really have been kind of one to buck the system all the way through. So I'm just like, okay, if it doesn't work for you that I'm doing it, I don't really care. I'm doing it.
Wow.
So as far as like anything which was I hope will exist in the here and now and moving forward for the conservatories, where there'll be some conversations about diversity and equity and inclusion. No, those conversations did not happen.
I am not at all convinced they're happening now. From my narrow window into this, through my son who just graduated from, well, I don't want to name the conservatory. He had a fantastic experience. It's a great conservatory, great music school. But, and I went to Oberlin. I didn't go to the conservatory. I went to the college, and I can't speak for them. But from what I saw from my son's perspective, it seems like at least his school, which sees itself as a very progressive, forward-thinking, top-tier school. I think the conversations about diversity and a whole host of other issues that other campuses are having very robustly, I think they're in the dark ages. I mean, I have a younger son who goes to a small liberal arts college, and they have on their website their anti-racism plan. This 100-page document and updates with all the things that they're doing to move forward on all these items in these 100 pages. My son's music school hasn't even begun to really ask the question. So unfortunately, from my narrow window onto things, perhaps people in other places see it differently. Um, you know.
Well, I'm hoping that with the most current activities of our country, that from this fall moving forward, that the discussion will open up.
Yeah.
I am I'm very hopeful about it. Um, Even in institutions or systems that are already in place, I started to see a little bit of activity, like in January, right before all this happened with the pandemic and shutdowns, things like that. I attended the Chamber of Music America conference, which I do on and off,
Hmm.
and there was a huge emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion at the conference this year, and they've been kind of slowly ramping up their efforts to actually make real actions happen in the world of classical and chamber music and beyond, to try to open up the field more, be just more accepting of different peoples into the field. So maybe there was already kind of a start or a brewing of something new coming, but I would really hope that from this fall forward, there has to be real dialogue about it.
Yeah.
I with my alma mater, I've let them know pretty clearly that I feel that they could make a better effort to be more open to different people and different styles and different ways of teaching. And as we started this conversation, obviously that the idea of culturally responsive teaching and sustainable education is something that I'm pretty passionate about and could actually feed all the way up into the conservatory system pretty easily at this point. There are lots of composers of color out there to choose from, contemporary composers that could be getting a lot more exposure to kids in conservatories and repertoire that's being played. So now is a good time to try to make that happen. It's not like we don't have contemporary people of color writing amazing music. We do. So that could be happening in the conservatory and the classical system. If that's the desire, it's possible to have a very robust curriculum that includes people of color on a much higher level as composers or soloists, or even just hiring them to be faculty members. This too has been very lacking for a very long time, and it seems to be starting to change a little bit.
Yeah. Who are in I'll just affirm that and say I really hope this is a transformational moment. I really hope. There's a lot of people are talking right now, but let's hope that the systems change. Who are there people who are touchstones for you, role models for you, whether they're performers or composers or educators, who you look to as, if not being an example, then being a force for change?
Well, I think in my undergraduate teacher was a really great example for me. I didn't really realize that until I got out of school and pretty far away from working with him. But Emmanuel Vardy was really a tremendous violist, but also a tremendous force for independence. So he just kind of didn't go the way like every other violist in the world. So he would play music that he liked and inspired him, and he's very well known for his recording of the Paganini Caprices for violin, but he played all of them on the viola, which is, if you haven't heard that, it's mind-blowing that he did all that.
Yeah.
But even just that's pretty indicative of who he was. It was kind of like, for him, find your independent voice. So he let me do that.
Yeah.
He was very good about supporting his students to find their independent voice.
Right.
Like, you know, there are some teachers back then and still now that feel like tradition is key and you have to do everything the same way, like it had always been done before, do the same bowing, do the same fingering, make the same nuances. He was the complete opposite. He would have conversations with me about what I was playing, and he would just say, prepare this for me, bring it in. What we're mostly going to talk about is the musical aspects behind it. And he would say, I'm not going to tell you how to play it. But if the phrasing sounds like it doesn't make sense, we'll have a discussion about it. So he would leave you to make your own bowings, your own fingerings, to make your phrasing decisions. For 4 years, I had that.
Wow.
And for 4 years, it was a good thing that I was able to do that, because it helped me to understand that it was okay to have my own voice.
Yeah.
So the voice of whatever I thought musically should be happening in a piece was okay with him. Yeah. I was so not, I almost had to like back up and like understand that it was okay for me to make those decisions, because what had come prior was like, oh, the accent goes here, or you have to do this phrasing, or you got to play it with that fingering, or else it's wrong. He was the opposite, like, do whatever you want.
Wow.
It was great.
That's amazing.
It was really great.
I was going to make a comment about Juilliard and the kind of place it is, and where people are trying to get to, and their vision for how to get there. You know, what it was like then. But it sounds like your MSM experience is one where you had a teacher who allowed you to be yourself, find your own voice. How did you get into improvisation?
Well, that's kind of a really hilarious story. So for some people that don't know that I played trombone when I was there.
Where did you play trombone?
At MSM, because I'll make this story short.
Yeah.
But I had these two roommates. They were brothers.
Yeah.
One of them played the trombone, and I always loved the sound of trombone. And he was like, oh, well, if you love it so much, why don't you just buy my old trombone and play? And it's like, well, how much do you want to sell it to me for? So he sold me his trombone, and by some craziness, like a trombone player friend of mine found out that I had bought this trombone from that guy, because we're all going to the same school. So I guess he told somebody. And then at that time, they decided to start a third jazz band. And so all of a sudden, Bobby Keller, the head of Jazz Band 3, finds me in the lobby. I'm like, who is this person? I'm a viola player here. So, you know, and I think that was my sophomore or junior year. Sophomore year, I think it was. And he's like, well, we started third jazz band, and we need trombone players. I was like, and? I don't know how to play this thing. And he was like, oh, no, you don't have to worry about it. Just come and sit in and see how you feel. And I just looked at him again. I was like, I don't know how to play the trombone. He said, oh, no, I'm sure you're fine. Just show up. So I showed up. And I knew barely how to play.
Yeah.
And I asked friends who were trombone players to teach me how to play the trombone. So
Wow.
they did. And so I just kind of played the trombone for 3 years for fun in that band. Nobody cared if I could play or not. And I got better and better at it. And it's funny that you had mentioned in our last conversation about Justin DeChocho. I
Yeah.
ended up playing in a band that he was conducting
No
for about
way.
a week in one of those summers during those 3 years,
Yeah.
because they needed a trombone player, and I kind of started there.
Wow.
I very often want to discount those 3 years, but actually they were really important years, because that's where I really learned to understand jazz phrasing, was
Right.
in those 3 years. And then I just kind of like translated it to the viola.
Wow. 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 Um, I can't imagine there are many violists who are doing improvisation. Now, do you do jazz? I'm aware that there are different kinds of improvisation, that improvisation can be classical improvisation too, but you do jazz improvisation on viola? Is that
Well, when I
true?
first started out doing it, I was doing like traditional jazz improvisation, which was like playing over standard chord changes and things like that.
Mhm.
But as it went on, I started to really realize that this is not where my voice is as an improviser.
Mhm.
So I really am an avant-garde improviser on viola. So
Wow.
that's my voice. As
Wow.
far as improvisation, it's not running chord changes over and over again for me. It's the opposite. I do way better without the chord changes. Not that I can't play over them, I can, and I've taught people how to do that.
Wow.
But for me to express myself, I find that the open, free jazz,
Yeah.
free avant-garde improvisation is more interesting to me.
Wow.
So, I mean, I've had people ask me, as you said, like, who are your greatest influences for like being an improviser? And my answer is, I came to realize it was John Coltrane and Paul Hindemith, a mixture.
Yeah.
Those are my two influences
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
improviser. So
That's
those are
wonderful.
my two improvising influences, and I just find it more freeing to not have to be tied down to chord changes.
Yeah.
So I kind of moved beyond that.
Yeah. Coltrane people will nod and go, of course, and they'll think of their favorite Coltrane, and later Coltrane, or it goes into the stratosphere, into the interstellar space. But
Right. Yes.
really, I mean, just amazing deep stuff. But Paul Hindemith, that people might not, he might not be people's go-to. What speaks to you about Hindemith? Didn't Hindemith write a viola concerto?
Yeah, well, he wrote some major viola pieces for viola and orchestra, the Swan and Dreyer,
Uh-huh.
and also trial music. Those are kind of considered like Swan and Dreyer is like a real viola concerto.
Yeah.
Trial music is a piece that's like viola with chamber orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote some incredible viola sonatas for solo alone sonatas and for viola and piano.
Well,
So
yeah. Well, what is it
go ahead.
about his musical language that inspires you to make the music you do?
I think it's just like the open chordalness about it, like the
Mm-hmm.
fourths and the fifths, and just different kinds of the patterns that he has are really fascinating to me.
Wow. Wow.
So I think that's why I always gravitated to it. We used to have this saying about like when you have your viola concerto, like what's your concerto? Like, so back when we were studying, there was three major,
Well,
there were two, and then a minor one. So it was like the Bartok viola concerto, Walton viola concerto, and the minor was the Hindemith one. And I was kind of like, I am not feeling the other two. It's the
Yeah.
Hindemith one that I like the best,
Wow.
and I've stayed with that one.
Wow, that's a. You want to hear a Hindemith story that kind of ties this back?
Sure.
So 1990 must have been August of 1990, and it was the end of the summer, and I met my wife in Lenox, and we weren't married yet, but we're hanging out in Lenox, and we go to Tanglewood, and at the time, I don't know if they still have this, but in Tanglewood there was this. Now what they call the Shed is this fancy place, but back then there was something that was literally a shed, and it's where rehearsals took place, and here's some music coming out of it, and we go in, and there's Leonard Bernstein conducting the Tanglewood Youth Symphony in Matis der Maler, right? The Matis der Maler Symphony.
Okay.
And I mean, you're talking like a small space that held maybe 50 people. There were maybe 10 people watching the rehearsal, and you're sitting 20 feet from Leonard Bernstein in the last year of his life, conduct. And it was just one of the most amazing experiences. I had to see him do this. And at one point he's conducting and he's really getting into it. He says, "This is great jazz." So then he's doing that. And then someone walks in and I look up and it's Bobby McFerrin.
Uh-huh.
And Bobby McFerrin, audibly yet quietly and respectfully, is improvising vocally on top of what the orchestra's playing.
Oh, that's really cool.
My mind was sufficiently blown. It was one of the best musical experiences of my life. That's really beautiful to hear. Are your in the avant-garde world, you talk about Hindemith and Coltrane, but are there performers who you especially like? I think art ensemble of Chicago is
yes. I mean, Lester Bowie and his Brass Fantasy, really cool. Trying to think of who else really has struck me besides those two, Coltrane and Hindemith. There's just a lot of people right now that are doing some really amazing stuff. It's just such an open, wide world for improvisation at this point. Like the idea of what is jazz or what's improvisation, there really is no definition or meaning to it. It's what you think it is. And so I think there are just so many people that are doing really cool stuff.
Wow. I mean, I want to hear your music. Is any are any of the work that you've done doing improvisations, any of that on YouTube?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
My current stuff with my band is up. We're about to actually have a video project released. I think it'll come out in the early fall. We're in the process of making that right now. But there are things on YouTube that you can watch with me doing that. A lot of improvisation stuff. Some older than others. So, yeah. But the most recent stuff I would say is up from my band that came together, which has only been around for like a year and a half or so, which is called Jump Off This Bridge. And it's got an interesting title. Well, it took us a while to decide on the title, but
I guess it's right. Jump off this bridge that you're playing. That's great.
Right. So, so the combination of instruments is interesting, and even from the get-go, being viola, trumpet, piano, and percussion. And the percussion is just a wide world of whatever he decides he wants to play.
Yeah. Amazing. I can't wait to hear it. Judith, tell us about your work as an activist, aside from music, and how that came about and what you've done and what that's been like for you.
I mean, I think I've been most active in my efforts when I was a community board member for Community Board 9 Manhattan. I served there for 6 years. I was on both the Arts and Culture Committee and the Youth Education Libraries Committee, and helped in many ways. I think particularly I spent more time on the Youth Education Libraries Committee with helping parents, community members, school leaders, to help them to try to deal with any problems that would arise. I mean, literally anything. They would come to our committee and ask us to help them with things like having proper spaces to teach. Like there used to be all these trailers that were used for teaching, and where there should have been classrooms, and we would help and lobby and help them to try to get proper classrooms for students. And we'd have youth conferences where we'd have youth groups come together and talk about issues that meant something to them, like diversity, equity, inclusion, or things like healthcare, trying to have affordable housing, and all sorts of things. It was just like anything that, from the youth perspective or a school perspective. And even librarians would come to us and ask us for help. They'd come and talk to us about like lack of funding for libraries, and we'd have to try to pass resolutions to help them to deal with that, or library hours being reduced and things like that. And also for our Youth Education Libraries Committee, we had this unique job that we had to do as far as reviewing submissions for charter schools. So charter schools have to get a community acceptance before they can move on to the next levels for actually becoming a charter school. So here, I don't know if this is the same with other states, but here in New York City, you actually have to go to your community board and present your proposal before it can move up in the chain to becoming a charter school.
Yeah.
So we heard a lot of different charter school proposals, and helped whenever we could to help them to get the resources they needed, or if they were coming with proposals that were not really fully formed, we would try to help them to flesh out their proposals more and come back. So a lot of stuff.
Wow.
A lot of work that I had to do as a liaison with Columbia University in regards to their expansion project into our neighborhood. That took up a lot of time.
Wow.
So,
wow. So did you have to hold the line and prevent Columbia from taking over the neighborhood? Was that your role?
Well, at that point, it was too late. Yeah. So they have a community benefits agreement. Good. And just holding the line and holding them to what they agreed to for the community. And that was a huge task.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But good for you for doing it. Yeah. Judith, I have to say, it's such a privilege to talk to you and to not only hear about your work, but to hear about what you're doing, the reach you're having, the obstacles you had to confront, and how you push through them. And it's so inspiring to hear your example. And I can only imagine how your work and your life and your commitments are inspiring to other people. And I know that when people listen to our conversation, I imagine they'll feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I said before is I have this tendency that when I think that something needs to get done, I just put my mind to it and it gets done. So it's like, okay, do we need to go up against Columbia about this or that, or you know, we have to stand up for the rights of students, okay, let's do it. I'm not backing down. If it needs to happen, then I make sure that I help it to happen.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Justin. It was really great to reconnect with you, and thank you for inviting me to come in and talk.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Next year, come up and visit me in Northampton, or I'll come down and visit you.
Okay, sure. Would love to do that.
Be great. All right.